Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Erasmus Expeditions. I am here for episode 24, I believe, of the Help Action series. This is a show on the channel where I invite a guest on and we discuss a topic. We interview them to get to know them just a little bit better, and we ask questions and answers from the audience. So I'm really excited. The series has been going really well so far. I enjoy this kind of thing where I get to sit down and kind of talk shop and pick somebody's brain for a little while. And this episode is going to be all about locations in your games. Location. And I'm very excited because I'm having a great friend of mine, a person I have had the luxury of meeting at least once in person, maybe twice. I don't know. It kind of blurs together. Maybe it's just once. But we also got to play in several games together. Rob Coletta. Rob, how are you, you son of a bitch?
You son of a bitch. I was looking forward to this line. I'm doing really good, man. Thanks. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. Like I said, it's a holiday weekend here, so happy Memorial Day to anybody here in the States who may be celebrating that. But yeah, just spent the day getting ready for this and spending time with the family, playing some video games. How about you?
I mean, today's been a bank holiday, which basically is an old term, a UK term, which means that it was a specific day when banks closed originally, hence the name. But that doesn't really mean much anymore where everything is closed. So it's kind of just like a normal day, really. A normal day in a very not normal world at the moment. But it's still enjoyable, you know? It's been lovely to relax for a long time.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I wish that I'd had more time off of work through all of this, but the company I work for was deemed essential, and they wanted me to keep coming in, so I've been working through this entire thing. I think I got maybe about a week off, but I have a job, and that's more than a lot of people can say, unfortunately. So I try not to complain too much about it.
No, absolutely. I feel very lucky. While I'm not actually working at the moment, I am furloughed, which means the company I work for do support me. So I don't really have too much to complain about either, to be honest. So yeah, it's a good thing. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, man. But I can tell you that all of this downtime has been great for gaming because everybody's available.
That's right. It's been a glut of gaming. I haven't been playing this many games since my university days, I reckon, when we do that. Not as much as that, admittedly, because then me and my friends all lived together and we played. So we played, we slept, we woke up, we played, and so on. So not quite as much as that, but getting close. There's a lot of gaming going on.
That's awesome, man. That's actually one of the first questions that I like to kind of lead off with is kind of when and how did you find gaming? How did you get into this weird, wacky hobby?
Oh, man. Well, I was about 13, 14, I think, and I was at school. And my friend asked me, we had the same, we were in the same, what was it called? Tutor group, form group. It's basically where you went for someone to take registration before you then went to your first class of the day or whatever. And yeah, he came over to me one day and said, Rob, we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons at Dungeons and Dragons club that is held in this very room. How have we never heard of this before? And apparently there was a D&D club that went on in the lab classroom at lunch times and things like that. And yeah, I just said, yeah, why not? Let's give it a go. After having a brief pitch about kind of what it was, not really understanding it. And then, yeah, suddenly, like, I played video games before, so I kind of had the idea of, you know, what it was to, like, make your own character and experience that, but I wasn't quite ready for what I discovered. And I obviously have never recovered, because here I am. But, no, it was fantastic. My first Dungeon Master was my science teacher, and he was a terrifying, terrifying man. No, genuinely, like, he was, like, obviously we were all kids, so, like, he seemed, like, 7 foot tall. He himself was a giant, you know, he was CR15, man. He was a crazy, crazy guy. Like he would shout at you for anything. Like he was super strict. But then when he would run these D&D games, he would obviously be terrifying, but on another level as well, because he'd be terrifying to our characters as well. So my introduction to D&D was a very trial by fire ordeal. And yeah, I came away obviously wanting more. And then, yeah, like I said, I introduced it to my friends at uni. Got a theatrical background, so they responded to it really well as well. And then, yeah, from there, just kept going. Moved to playing online as a lot with the discovery of the AbTab group and that lot. So yeah.
Yeah, dude. I had a somewhat similar experience, although I did not learn to play at school. I'm pretty sure that there was several groups of mothers that would have had conniption fits here.
Sure.
We were playing at school. Magic the Gathering was enough. But yeah, I actually learned, of all places, to play in the Boy Scouts. My Scoutmaster was my first.
No way.
Yeah, absolutely. And
that's cool.
We played very infrequently, like twice a year, and it was like for 4 hours at a time, maybe. But then I got into going to a college, and I was in the drama department. And another friend of mine had moved there from out of state, and we got to talking one night. And he was like, "Yeah, I used to run a game and play D&D and stuff." I was like, "Really? I did too. We should try to see about putting a group together." So we did. It was all theater people, and like our tech theater teacher played with us, and we actually got to play on the stage a couple of times. And a friend of mine we both made our characters' weapons out of wood in shop class. So,
that's incredible.
Yeah, it was really cool. That's where I started really kind of falling in love with D&D. And then right around the time I was 20, I started hosting my own group at my house. And a lot of them were people from Scouts that I had learned to play with and things like that. So, and we've been playing for about 20 years together as a group on a weekly basis.
I was going to say, this was one of the first things we spoke about in person because we met at Con, and I remember you telling me that you've been going for 20 years or something around that point anyway, and I was absolutely dumbfounded. It's the same sort of world and everything, right?
So yeah, I started working on my first homebrew world kind of in earnest about 3 years into that or so. So yeah, I've been working on my main home world, Rostfiend, for about 17 years. And it's the one that I run a couple of campaigns and stuff on the channel here that you can find. I've run some campaigns in that setting. But yeah, it's a good group of people. Now it's kind of dwindled down in size a little over the years, and other people's spouses have now joined. So the group kind of bolstered back up. But we have kind of a good mixture of genders and people who are new and older to the game and stuff. So it's a good group, and we're all really, really good friends. So.
It does sound like it's a good balance. And when you sort of lose people, that's what we like to call refining, Jeremy.
yeah. Sometimes. It's very, very true.
No, I'm just messing around. Sometimes, for sure. Yeah. Sometimes, yeah.
There's definitely been a few of those where it was like, ooh, man, that was a hard break, but I'm glad we're done. Like, that needed to happen.
It was interesting. Before I jumped on this, I thought I would just check out some of the stuff on your channel just for a refresher. And I can't remember which video I clicked on, but you were talking about playing in different gaming groups, and it struck a chord with me. I think you described it as every gaming group has their own language. And I started thinking about that and how it is so different from if I were to run a game with my friends who I, from school or went to uni with. It would be a completely different game for if I were to run it through AbTab online. I think everyone has their different ways of playing, and I think it's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, like, you're going to have a different kind of conversation with different groups of people. Your group work and your family and your friends, that conversation, if somebody was to be a fly on the wall and listen, it's going to sound like a completely different you. You're going to bring up different subjects. You're going to laugh easier in certain groups than you are in others. You're going to use better grammar than you are with other people. That's just a natural way of who we are as humans. So why would a gaming experience be any different? Because
that's very true.
Yeah, that gaming experience is made up of people just having a conversation. So there's going to be certain gaming groups that really, really like heavy role play. And that's great. That's fantastic. If that's what that group likes to do, then do more of that. There's other groups that really like tactical combat, grids and miniatures and terrain. And that's great too. Play that if that's what your group likes. But you have to kind of understand, if you do understand that you're stepping into that different psychology, that different language, you're going to be much better off, because then you understand how to manipulate that situation, how to frighten those players, how to amuse them, how to give them the rewards that make them really invested in the game, how to challenge them. You're a lot more aware of what you need to bring to the table if you understand what language everybody is speaking.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there was something to be said of, you said, bringing different experiences, players with a different experience level. So some people that have been playing for 20 years, some people that have been playing for 5 minutes or something. I think there's something really amazing about that. And that is where I think you learn to understand that there are introductions that people have to go through to understand that language of a gaming group. And it's obviously amazing when players all take it upon themselves to be an open book for new people when it comes to doing that. I think that's the key to introducing people to role-playing games and different role-playing game groups and things like that.
Yeah, I've run into players who they get frustrated or angry or upset with a new player who doesn't understand like what their character is capable of and that kind of stuff. And it's like, hey, look, like we were all there at one point. There's absolutely no reason to be that way towards them. And if you're going to be that way towards them, they're less likely to come back and play again. Like, make it a good experience for them. Make them fall in love with it the way that you fell in love with it. And then we'll have a new player. And if we have a new player and they haven't been playing for 20 years, then they get to be surprised whenever they fight a dragon for the first time.
Yeah.
You know? Whenever you
100%.
describe how visceral a scene is, you can watch their eyes get huge and you've got them hook, line, and sinker. That's what every dungeon master is looking for at the table, is that moment where somebody gets that hook deeply set, because then everybody else is going to jump on board. The excitement is contagious.
Absolutely. And to the point of people being frustrated with those who are new in the game or new in the community or whatever. I mean, if you think about it, we've all had that conversation where someone has said to us, well, what is Dungeons and Dragons? We've all done this thing where we go, well, because we understand it isn't exactly the easiest thing to explain to people. It really isn't. So I think it's perfectly natural for people to feel perplexed and bewildered by it anyway. It's natural, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I still have yet to find a concise, easy description for what Dungeons and Dragons is to give to someone who has no idea. Because the only real way to describe it is to either play it or to describe it to such degree that you can watch the fog roll in over their vision as they lose complete interest in what you're talking about.
We've all seen the fog. We've all seen the fog, Jeremy. Oh, man. It's an interesting point, isn't it? Like, I don't think it can be explained succinctly, other than if the explanation is wrong. Like we were saying before, like witchcraft. People would say Dungeons and Dragons, that's witchcraft. If you could explain it that easily, then you're probably wrong about it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I think it's just simply too much of a nuanced thing. And it means different things to different people. So
it does.
Hard to nail down. Okay, so we're here to talk about locations. One of the things that I wanted to bring up was how do you make a location come to life? What are the kinds of things that you feel like you should include in your descriptions when you're introducing your players to a new place?
Yeah, so if it's the initial introduction, then it is sort of like introducing your players to a new character or a new situation. That is the job of the Dungeon Master, really, isn't it? Is to try and communicate where they are and what this might mean for the game. Because really, any location has a purpose in real life or D&D. So in explaining what it is, I think you should signify the purpose of it. If it's a small town, you know, you just explain the general look of the place, how it feels to be there. Are you slightly intimidated by the town because people are staring at you strangely when you walk through the streets? You know, like you've got to introduce it in the same way that you'd introduce any idea, I think, and try and lean towards the relevancy of the place towards the game, because obviously they're going there for a reason. Maybe it's there just for them to buy and sell weapons. Maybe it's there because one of their factions has got a base here or something. And I think linking it towards a purpose then gives them something to go on. So then they want to explore it and ask more questions about it. Yeah. How about you?
I think having an idea for what you want to happen in a location is pretty key to understanding the proper kind of location to use for a specific scene. And you, like you said, with the shorthand that you choose, the kind of location it is, the way that you describe it, you're adding to that language of the table. You're telling everyone, this is the tropes that we're hitting on in this moment in this story. This is what I need from you guys to connect to this with. So you understand whenever you walk into a scene, oh, this is supposed to be scary and spooky, and I'm supposed to be frightened and a little on edge. So that's the way that I'm going to act as a player in the scene, because the DM has set up that scene with those cues. Hopefully, if you find that your players aren't catching on to those things, then you need to be more obvious with your descriptions about that whenever you're describing your location.
Yeah, and I think understanding the importance and the relevancy of the location to the game is key for both players and a dungeon master. I think if you're just making things happen there for the sake of it, maybe you need to think about, why do you want them to be here? Like you say, we can introduce this as a scary town, but if it's a scary town, then why do we have to come to the scary town? Why do we want to be in this horrible place if it's so bad? So some form of intention and some for it to exist in the first place, I think, and some intention for you to remain there, I think, is my roundabout way of going about it.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good point. I think that I think also making it dynamic. Like, the players should be able to interact and to change things about it, specifically through action. If you have a chandelier in a room, let them cut the rope down and let it fall. Let them collapse the support structure so that the roof caves in. Let them do things in the environment so that there's a little bit of ownership. Kind of encourage them to change things about it, because typically in these stories, these people are the protagonists of your tale. And if you look in any story where there's protagonists, books, movies, it doesn't matter, the protagonist is changing things as they go. Typically, they leave a wake of altered things in the world behind them. That's kind of a thing that you should be trying to allow your players to do, because they are the heroes in your story.
Yeah, and I think, players do this all the time anyway. As soon as they'll do the work for you. As soon as you tell them they're in a town, they'll tell you where they want to go, really. So, if what they're interested in, they will inevitably find. Because I think it's important for you to embrace, once again, they're here for a reason. They've come here because they need to achieve something, or simply maybe they just want to buy new weapons and kit and things like that. Do you think that it's how relaxed are you about players coming to a new town and them saying, I want to, I don't know, buy some potions? If you haven't prepped for a potion shop or an apothecary to be in this town, would you just say, yeah, there is one for simplicity because that's the reason they're here, is to stock up on supplies? Or would you say from the beginning, no, I have prepped this town, doesn't have a potion shop, doesn't have an alchemist's? Is there a right or wrong answer? Because I don't think there is, but I'm curious how you'd approach that.
So I think younger, I would be a lot more apt to say, sorry, there's not one of those in this town. I've already drawn the map of the town. I've labeled and named all of the buildings. I used to do a lot of that early on in my DMing, and I don't so much anymore. But to me now, it's more about whether it makes sense within the narrative. If you go into a town where there's 4 hovels, you're not going to find a shop that has magic items on the walls. I'm sorry, like that just doesn't make any sense. That breaks the suspension of disbelief for me too much. But if you're walking into the capital of a large kingdom, if you want to find pretty much anything, as long as it's within the setting boundaries, then yeah, absolutely, go ahead. No big deal.
Yeah, I think again, approaching a location. I mean, we're talking about towns at the moment and cities, really, or rather, I might have used that as the example initially. I think, with them coming for treating a town or a city like a character, for example, you decide whether that character is a helpful character or an unhelpful character, a protagonist or an antagonist, someone that's going to help the player, someone that isn't going to help. For example, we said this scary town, for instance. Like, there isn't likely going to be potion supplies or an alchemist there, because that would alleviate tension. If they need to heal themselves, but they need supplies, then maybe if they come to a place where they don't have that and they have to maybe work harder to achieve or to get supplies, that sort of thing. Yeah, I think it entirely depends on the situation with that and how you execute that. But I agree. I think it's better to be to stick to your guns for that. Like if you have this town in mind where, like you say, it is only a few hovels, it should only be a few hovels, and yeah, stick to it, I think.
Yeah, I'm a pretty big proponent of no is an okay word for a DM to use. Like, I, sometimes that is the right answer. No, not no and, just no. Sometimes that's the best answer, but you have to use it sparingly. You have to, like you said, understand where you're comfortable giving and give there. If you're not comfortable giving in another area, then don't give there. It's okay.
Yeah, 100%. 100%.
One of the other things that I wanted to mention specifically with locations and having them kind of come to life, what you would include in your descriptions and things is a lot of people have heard about the five senses trick. Definitely hit on 2 or 3 of the 5 senses. Describe how it smells, how it looks, how the air tastes or feels, how the ground feels under their boots, how it sounds, with the sounds echoing off the walls. That kind of stuff is very, very vivid for people who have the capability of forming vivid imaginations in their minds. I actually heard that there's just recently I learned that there's a condition where people cannot visually see things in their mind from descriptions alone. Yeah, so that would suck. I don't imagine a person like that would play Dungeons and Dragons very much.
No, I can't imagine that. Yeah, that sounds awful.
Yeah, right. So there is a question that came in from the audience tonight. This is from Undead 4260. How would you describe a gladiator arena? I'm trying to figure it out for a game where it's part of a dream message for the players.
So the gladiator arena, I imagine the players are in the arena in their dream. Is that what that means?
That's what it sounds like. Yeah.
Yeah, that is. I mean, Jeremy, you just mentioned the 5 senses thing. I can think of no better place to start with that particular setting, because, like we're talking about the intention of places, the intention of a gladiator arena is to put people in so they'll kill each other. It's as simple as that, and they'll do it for the entertainment of others. So I think it's really firing on all cylinders towards the sensations that you would feel if you're just about to go through those gates into a gladiatorial arena. What it feels like when literally the ground beneath your feet is shaking for the cheers and the jeering and the lust for blood. And that is a good question. The blood that's everywhere, the blood that hasn't been cleaned up since the last fight. You could explain to your characters that you would feel nauseous. Perhaps you're standing beneath the fighting arena and the blood is dripping down from above. Assault the senses is the way to go, particularly for dreams as well, I think, because I think with dreams you have the luxury of not having to be too specific. In fact, the vaguer sometimes the better, because then you have to use your imagination more. you know?
Yeah, I agree. And with dreams, especially, you don't have to worry too much about making it feel realistic. You can hit one or two brief snaps and then move right along to something else, and it can be completely disjointed and not make a lot of sense in the immediate context, because it will become clearer later on as they get the missing pieces that kind of make it all make sense. But yeah, absolutely. I tend to kind of try to picture what it would be like to actually be in any given scenario, a specific place, a specific situation. So while I've never stepped foot inside of a live gladiator arena, I've seen a lot of movies and television that depict that kind of moment, and I've been in similar situations. I've been to sports stadiums with a throng of people, cheering and yelling and screaming and getting upset and angry and very invested in what's going on. So I can kind of imagine and extrapolate some of that information into what it might be like. But yeah, the sand, the dust, the blood, one of the most, I was going to say the word delicious to describe it, and that's really an awful way to say it, because what I'm talking about is in Gladiator, where he notices that the one guy is pissing down his own leg right before they enter the arena, and he decides to take a step back. That is a very provocative image, because the kind of fear that a normal person would feel stepping into that situation has got to be palpable. And if that's what you're trying to drive home with your players, then that's where you should focus your attention when you're describing it to them. If you want them to be afraid, then make them afraid.
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting that you brought this up in a modern context as well, because you're absolutely right. Boxing is bigger than it's ever been before. UFC is huge. There's a quote, I'm going to misquote it, but there's a quote somewhere saying the new cathedrals of our world are stadiums. And there's like there's a euphoria that passes through a crowd united, or a mob unified against wanting to see the existential moment where life becomes death. It's as simple as that. It's either one or the other. They're here for that feeling. They're there for them to be this ambiguous mass that can enjoy something primal. And to the point where it is a religious experience. Look at the Coliseum in Rome, like it is a cathedral. It's this great, giant, sweeping, arch-built stadium that was built in a way that people still can't replicate. How you could hear a pin drop on one side of the Coliseum. You could hear it, like it was built in such a way. It's deifying the experience. Go ahead.
I was really, really fortunate as a teenager, and we had befriended some people through Scouts, some of the people who were in international, different scouting in different countries. And one of the people that we ended up hosting whenever they came here was people from Italy. And one of them was a Don. He was a priest for a cathedral in a small town in Italy. Anyways, we got to go visit over there for 2 weeks when I was a teenager, and we spent a week in Rome, and I actually got to step foot in the Coliseum. And there is an unmistakable presence in that building. You can feel the history and energy or something about that place. It's not like just stepping into a normal, ruin or a normal large building. It's a very eerie place.
I mean, if we're talking about fantasy settings as well, like you can, and bringing this back to this dream sequence, then that is something that you could definitely lean towards, that you can actually feel the energy that would have been left within a place like this. I think that would be especially in a dream as well. Like it's made for it, and it's so visual. Like you were explaining the stat scene in Gladiator where they're about to go out. He's put on the spiked helmet and he looks down and he sees the guy has wet himself. Like I don't think a word is. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've seen Gladiator. I do love the film, but I'm pretty sure a word isn't spoken. It's all done through imagery. It's just shown like how scared people are. So I suppose, yeah, like entwine that into the description as well. Like how does it just affect you to be in a place like that, knowing what it's all about?
Absolutely. And again, with a fantasy setting, and especially whenever you're talking about a dream, dreams can be very literal. So, maybe it's sand and then they step out on it and they realize that they're actually standing on nothing but bones of all of the people who have come and died before in this arena. Again, you're setting the stage for how you want your players to react and feel to this. So, especially with a dream, push the envelope, like push it beyond where you think it might normally make sense to go.
Yeah, dream locations. I didn't see that one coming when we picked the topic. It's a good one. It's a good one.
That's absolutely awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Undead.
Yeah, that was great. That was great.
Okay. So chugging right along. So since we have kind of discussed this a little bit already, in the real world, any given biome has a profound effect on the cultures that live within it. From diet to clothing, to travel and trade, to religion, to physical appearance even. How can you use these things to illustrate a location that is outside the realm of our mundane world?
Right. So using the sort of familiar cultural, I don't know. I'm trying to think about how best to answer that. Actually, could you repeat just repeat the question again?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the real world, any given biome has a profound effect on the cultures that live within it. From the diet to the clothing to the travel and the trade, religion, physical appearance even. How can you use these kinds of things to illustrate that a location is outside the realm of our mundane world?
Gotcha. Right. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because that's where you see the differences, really, isn't it? In everyday life, that's where you should see the little differences. Like, for instance, if there's magic in the setting, then obviously things are going to be done differently. Like it is, if magic is mundane, then perhaps there's no need for, I don't know, if you can magically clean your house, for example, there's no need for you to have cleaning equipment or chemicals or anything like that. They just don't exist. So they just, that could be, I mean, yeah, it's what I mean. The way that I would explore it is probably through the quests, like and things that players can do. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. For example, the town could be there, or call it saying it's a town again, but it's the easiest example. So it's a mining town, so most of the people that you speak to are probably going to be miners. If you talk to NPC and he says, "I'm a miner," and then you say, "Oh, is there a mine nearby?" and they go, "No," then the immersion's broken. Like, well, why are you here? How are you feeding your family? So yeah, I think there's definitely that to consider, and how that affects the actual gameplay. I think because really these things have to be considered just through the lens of what players are going to really need to know and want to know. I think there are some things that you can just think of off the top of your head and have the answer. I don't think you can prep for every eventuality for that. I mean, I'm interested to hear what you say to this question, to be honest.
So, like, if a biome is like, we'll take it for Star Wars, for example, and you're talking about a place like Hoth. So there's places in our world that get that cold, that have that much ice and snow. Obviously, they filmed it someplace, but most of the time, most of the places in our world don't stay that way. But a place like Hoth has always been that way. So that should color the kinds of things that your players are going to be coming across. They're not going to come across ancient ruins of a civilization on Hoth because it's always been inhospitable. Or if they did, it's going to be a thing that should raise questions. Like, how did these people survive? What were they doing here? So that's the kind of thing where history it can be a very important thing. You need to consider the geography and the weather and the biome of a particular area, having going back, however long it may have been. What has that done to the people that are living there, that have been living there this whole time? And you can look for clues, look for ways to put clues in to the culture and the type of architecture that they use and all of that kind of stuff that is going to have been a product of where those people are. And that illustrates a history if it's colored a specific way. If there's a lot of open air places, then more than likely this place doesn't get a lot of humidity and a lot of rain. And it hasn't for some time. Their culture has shifted away from having to prepare for that because it doesn't happen. So when a massive rainstorm then washes through and everybody starts freaking out in the town, it can make sense as to why that's happening. And it could cue your players into the fact that, hey, something is amiss. We should look into this.
Yeah, I think I see what you mean now. And yeah, that is very interesting. Yeah, for example, if you do have like an ice planet or an ice world in a fantasy world or something, an ice realm, yeah, I can understand that. So then you could obviously ensure that your settlements are, if they have to live there, this is what I mean. If this is a civilization that has been here for hundreds and hundreds of years, then sure, they would have found a way to live in a way where they can survive. So I imagine building in caves, underground, things like that. So all their cities are beneath the surface. So that already gives you ideas of what the location is going to need. Well, how do they get oxygen down there? What do they do to keep the temperature up? It's obviously still going to be really cold under the ground too, if it's an ice planet, Yeah, that's really interesting. So you could explore that, like I said, with quests, like the people that you interact with, and the you can learn simply by people telling you, well, my job is to ensure that this sector of the city is well heated and water runs here, and we've been having a problem with our water system lately. Something has poisoned the water or disrupted the purity of the water or something like that. There we go. There's the reason for it. I see what you mean now. Sorry, it's a little slow on the uptake there.
No, not at all. It was a very wordy question. But yeah, it's informative if you allow it to be. Like you said, in finding ways to make the environment central to quests and NPCs and things like that, you're concreting that location in your player's mind. When they venture on past that location and you bring that location back up, more than likely they're going to say, oh, that's right, I remember, because we did the water heating thing for the ice miner guy. Yeah. Awesome. So I'm going to move right along. We have one of the preloaded questions we have comes from my good friend, Lloyd Collins.
Lloyd, excellent.
Speaking of Star Wars, one of the most central parts of Star Wars is stupid, dangerous locations. These places are hard to believe. Why were they built this way? Why is there no rail to stop someone from falling? Why would you choose to fight a duel here? All this to say, how much thought goes into making the locations in your games feel real versus feeling exciting?
That's a really good question, isn't it? I suppose with Star Wars, everywhere is dangerous, isn't it? And that's sort of part of the package. There's no health and safety with Star Wars. There's no hand railings. I mean, just because it's this real. What was the question? Said real or exciting?
Yeah. How much thought goes into making the locations in your games feel real versus feeling exciting?
But I think the thing is that feels real in Star Wars. That's where I wanted to make sure of the wording of that question, because in Star Wars, there's sort of an internal logic. I think if the world allows, no, it is, isn't it? Like the Star Destroyers have ravines in them. For Christ's sake, I mean, there are actual ravines in there. But it's thematic and it's adventurous, isn't it? And that's why Star Wars is Star Wars. Like, of course, there are deep ravines and chasms to cross over, like Ben Kenobi, like powering down the tractor beams on the Death Star. Like that's akin to the wizard balancing upon a precarious bridge. Khazad-dûm doesn't have any hand railings either, does it? But it's just the way it is. Yeah, I think if it has its own internal sense of logic, then I think that you can have both. I think real is exciting. You say real versus exciting. I think the fact that the reality allows for it and it is that's exciting. We do it to immerse ourselves, don't we? If it doesn't feel real to us, we know, because that immersion is broken. And Star Wars is obviously like a strong example for not really having to think about that too much, because that isn't the point of it. But I think when it comes to the, like, say, for example, the grittier games like Lloyd himself runs, then you would probably wonder, why isn't there? I'm just trying to think, because I'm just trying to think if we've ever come across handrails in the Game of Thrones game that we play, but there probably are. There's things on battlements to make sure you don't fall over the edge and things like that. Yeah, I think if it comes up, then absolutely. But as long as it fits the internal logic, like I say, the internal logic of the world, then I think then you're okay. What do you think?
Yeah, very much the same. I think there's a willing suspension of disbelief. Just like when you sit down to watch something like Star Wars, we as an audience are giving up some of our critical thinking. We're giving up a little bit of what it is about our normal logic that says, hey, that's not possible. Things, falling whenever they're in outer space, giant fireballs, making a huge noise, again, in space, light swords being able to stop each other. None of this makes any sense. But like you said, it's a part of the internal logic. It's a part of where we have set our willing suspension of disbelief, where we're okay with going beyond logic before it kind of becomes a breaking point. And then we start to really stop and question what's going on, and stop just enjoying what's happening. And I think understanding where the needle is on your table's willing suspension of disbelief is very important. Again, it goes back to that understanding the language of the people that you're with. If you're with a bunch of people who are really into anime, the chances are that you can push things pretty far into that territory before somebody's going to say, hey, wait a second. Yeah. If you're playing, in a Star Wars game, more than likely that's where your bearing needs to be. Put your needle on stupid, dangerous locations and be okay with it. If you're trying to run something that doesn't make sense, or for a group where their needle is lower, then don't push it.
Agreed. I'm trying not to say it depends, because whenever me and Lloyd talk about anything to do with settings, we say it depends. Although thinking about it, the one time they did have handrails in Star Wars, the Emperor got thrown over the edge anyway, right? There were handrails on that. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's right. I think there is a scene in one of them where Darth Vader actually loses a hand for the second time against a handrail.
Yeah,
I think Luke actually cuts off his right against the handrail.
For sure. Yeah.
Yep.
Poor handrails.
That's why they used to have them. They've all just been sliced away from multiple lightsaber duels through the eons.
That's right. They don't play anymore. They're just
like, we're not fixing it. We're not replacing it anymore.
That's it. Budget cuts of the Empire.
A lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so in epic storytelling, location is often a character unto itself, and that has a little bit to deal with Jason's question here as well. We may be able to roll both of these into one. So Westerns have their sweeping landscapes of vast wilderness. Middle-earth has its storied history, scattered and known to even the most rural of vast of corners of the world. Greek mythology is rife with monster layers and physical travel into other planes. How do you seed anticipation for an epic location to enrich the environment? How do you seed anticipation for an epic location that your players are eventually going to encounter?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think we could link it back to the Coliseum in a lot of ways, because the Coliseum is a location that was hugely famous, and because the gladiatorial culture in Rome was such a big deal, everyone knew about it. So if you have a location in your world that is deified in that manner, or has that reputation, or has that application, then you'll hear people talking about it. You'll hear the Roman soldiers speaking about this great place where they lost a bet, where Titus the Gaul was surprisingly killed by this unknown Spaniard warrior, and rumor sort of like, so then you're like, oh, okay, so there's this big Coliseum, and there was this great warrior that had a surprise defeat at the hands of an unknown. Like, it's this big rumor, like people are talking about it, there's an energy about it, people are starting to get an idea of what to expect from that place before they're even there. Now, obviously, we all know what an arena is. If everyone sort of knows that, right? We can agree that if I say arena to someone, they'll understand what I mean. So there is that level to it as well. People will already understand roughly what that is, but at least that way you're sort of communicating how big it is in the culture and how it affects people. So when you're dealing with grand spectacle like that, and how it would affect, like you say, you walked into the Coliseum and you experienced this feeling that you were able to tell me about just then. You could feel the energy from the place and how strange it was. Well, that's exactly what NPCs would say if they'd been in the ruins of an ancient Coliseum,
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's a lot to take away from even just the phrasing of the question itself. A location being a character itself. You hear that a lot in, people describing movies and books and things like that. The locations are really a character unto themselves. It's a kind of a tried remark. But in this case, if you actually kind of think about this epic locale in your campaign that you're building towards, build it up the same way you would your villain, as if it was literally another character in your story. If you want it to be famous, then make it famous. Make your characters come across mention of it and fallout based around what it may have done, its history. Have them coming across that multiple times, because that's going to be a part of that language at the table. You're establishing that as a commonality. Your players are going to eventually pick up on it and go, okay, I need to be remembering this because this is the fourth time that he's mentioned this particular place. And eventually it's going to stick.
It's interesting you saying about treating your like a ground location like an antagonist. The recent games that I'm running on my channel at the moment, The Watch, it's sort of like a gritty humanity versus nature scenario. Civilization versus the wild, and the wild is an omnipotent evil force that is essentially corrupting nature, which means that anywhere outside the walls of humanity is effectively trying to kill you. The big bad of the game is the environment, and it was built simply out of necessity because I say out of necessity. Lloyd basically came out with these new rules, the journey making travel matter available drive-through RPG. You're welcome, Lloyd. But I made this game to explore these rules because they just hit a nerve with me. Like, I just thought, oh, that's excellent. And Lloyd had been using it for Adventures in Middle Earth, which again is about coming across different locations with different reputations and different meanings and things like that. So that's really why I came up with the idea of the location trying to kill them, because it was a game all about travel. And I thought, well, it would be cool if they can actually think of the location that they're moving through as the villain. So that's why it's called the Wild, and it's this omnipotent force that can corrupt the souls of men to bring about the end of humanity, essentially. And that's just been a real fun in sort of showing this nature. What would nature look like if it decided, rather than being a way for humanity to support itself, for it to be a cause for humanity ending, that humanity, as Agent Smith says in The Matrix, like, is a disease and we are the cure, that kind of vibe. So it's interesting to play with. It's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I agree. It's a really cool thing to do. And it has old storytelling feel to it. That's very much what the point of a lot of the like old German classic folk tales that we know of, the Grimm's fairy tales and things. That was very much the point that they were trying to drive home. Don't go out in the woods because a wolf will eat you. So here's an entire story constructed to make that point so that you'll remember it and never forget that if you ever venture off into the woods, a wolf will find you and eat you. It's very much the man versus nature, breakdown of storytelling, literal, and I think that's really cool.
Sorry, mid-question, I got so excited I accidentally pushed a glass off my table, and I don't know if you saw.
Did you spill it?
No, it was empty. It's fine. I didn't. But I was aware that I sort of lunged forward.
Oh, you're okay. I'm used to people lunging at me, Rob. No, I
could never resist your charms. But no, it's sure. No, I absolutely. I can't remember what I was going to say, but yes, I completely agree with you. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, I appreciate that. So, one of the other questions that I had, kind of more about you, is I know that you are a working stage actor. How much of a difference does it make in your performance whenever you step foot onto a full set for the first time?
That's a really good question. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm not a working stage actor at the moment, Jeremy, but sometimes, yeah, for sure, when I get the work. And yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the feeling that a set gives you, it does feel like you're stepping into the world, and you're sort of seeing what you have to work with to make it seem real for the people watching. We were talking about suspending your disbelief. Well, no greater act of suspending your disbelief can occur than convincing an audience of people that, the people on the stage are, actually in a real situation, in a real world, and they're just looking in, it's super important. It's the only way that, great storytelling in theatre has ever been able to take place, for that little contract to occur between the audience and the performers. Yeah, it's a big deal. And that brings up a lot of questions, really, because there's a way of conveying a location without having to have everything about that location present on stage. For example, if I'm waiting at a train station, you just want to have like little bits of luggage dotted around, or like a big clock, or the times when the train is going to arrive, just things to suggest the location. You don't need to say everything about the location to give away where you are. And I think that's a key that you can bring to being a game master as well. You just have to have the little things that will trigger players' own experiences of a location like that, whether it be from film if it's a fantastical location, or whether it be from their own experience if it's like a mod game, for example. So just hints, and the players will do the work themselves, really.
That's funny. I've never really thought about it that way before, but you're absolutely hitting the nail on the head. And I think a good way to think about describing new locations to your players is almost like you're describing the set of a minimalist play. You're describing 2, 3, 4 elements that are present that make the point. The clock. Okay. Obviously a schedule is important in this place. The luggage. This is about travel. People are coming and going here. So yes, very few things that illustrate succinct points. Purposeful description, I think, is something that is probably a lot better than taking a long time and having this long diatribe of a description of a location.
And I think that works better in a way for things that are fantastical or sci-fi based, because you can just say we're at a train station and you and I would understand what that means. But if I say we're walking into the temple of I don't know, the Temple of Pelor, and no one knows what Pelor is, well, there's an awful lot of sunlight pouring in. Like, you're giving, like, even without saying, oh, he's the sun god, you're saying lots of sunlight is pouring in through the windows. Well, then you're sort of hitting on the important ideas of that particular deity without spelling it out, So just little clues is all players really need, and the rest they'll do with their own imaginations. It sounds like I'm being really lazy. Dungeon Master. But I think I've learned, and don't get me wrong, like I've been known for like preachy monologues and things like that. Sometimes I can over-explain things just when I'm talking to you right now. But I think it is important to understand that less is more, and it's better for people to do the work themselves, because it's not just it shouldn't just have to be me saying everything about this place. I can say something to you and you can do the rest yourself. You can fill in the blanks.
Absolutely. And that actually brings me very well right into another one of my points that I'd like to bring up, because a lot of this discussion is about how to do this as a GM. But what about as a player at the table? What kinds of things can you do as a player to enrich the environment of any given scene?
That's a good question. I'm thinking, because I think it's the most recent. Yeah, it's the most recent game I've played. The other day we were playing Old Ways, which is our Game of Thrones game that Lloyd runs on his channel, YarDM. And the location there, Blackmere, is our home. It is the seat of the house that we all essentially either belong to or work for. Because of that, we're there pretty much 80% of the time. Every now and then we'll go off on an adventure, but we will, for the most part, be there working stuff out and talking to other NPCs and trying to kingdom build. Essentially, it's a kingdom building game. But that, in a way, I think that's kind of dismissive, because it's not just about the management. There's lots of in-depth character. There's a lot of history that comes with the houses in Game of Thrones, as anyone who knows Game of Thrones would understand. And what's interesting about our characters is that they all come from different backgrounds. They have different experiences, and they all have different roles to play within the location that we're playing in. For example, you have Willard, who is the Lord of House Slate. And because of that, because he's the Lord, he is very much used to being in the council chambers. He's in his study. He's in the library. That's sort of the part of that location that is important to him. And because of that, we see when we're with Willard, that's the area of the location that we explore. If we're with Jeremy Snow, who is master of the hunt, for example, like he's in the stables, like he's feeding the dogs, like the hunting dogs and things like that. So if the location is important to you, I think it's important for players to establish the relationship they have with that place. Like I said, it's important for you to understand that if you're at a location, invariably there is a reason why you're there. And the reason why we're there is because we're sworn to it and because we work there. It's our job. Like, our job is to make sure that we have enough supplies to survive the winter. Our job is to ensure that rival houses don't outmaneuver us and outpolitic us and things like that. And because of that, we have to be hyper aware with everything that's going on with our little corner of the world. And that's what's really important about that game. And I think it is made or broken by the fact that each of us know where we belong in this place, and we know what we have to do to make that place continue running. Like, our job is to keep the train moving. Our job is to keep putting coal in that fire. And I think because the game is built in such a way where we're exploring these different roles in society, obviously Game of Thrones is very hierarchical. Like, you've got the lords and then the lords' relatives, and then you've got knights that are sworn to him, and then beneath them are the peasants and the small folk that, each of them have their own role to play in that. And I think that is key. And I think because players all understand that, they fulfill those roles, and that's what makes it work. Yeah. Sorry, I talked for quite a long time there.
No, it's perfect, and it brought up a very good point. I think understanding, again, the shorthand that has been delivered to you by the GM, when the GM has set up the stage that you're going to be playing in, understanding what they were getting at and doing what you can to support that vision, making that as singular as you can without trying to derail it for your own purposes. Go after your own motivations, but don't step outside of the expected, agreed upon kind of, again, language. If your GM is trying to make something seem like a scary, spooky place, then act afraid. Like, don't act like it doesn't bother you, and whatever. I've done this 100 times. That goes against the spirit of what the scene is supposed to be about. Sorry about the hounds. Speaking, that's Jeremy in the hounds.
Yeah.
So I have 2 points that I wanted to bring up in particular about this one point. And it is, if the GM describes elements of an environment, do something with them. If it's described about, how this room is entirely lit with candles, blow them out at some point during the combat or whatever's going to happen. Whatever makes sense within context of the scene. If there's a narrow ledge, try to walk across it. It was put there again, like you said, with a purpose, with a reason. And if you're engaging with that, then again, you're doing what you can to support what the GM is trying to go for. And typically that's going to lead to a much better place in your story overall, because everybody's kind of building towards the same agreed upon destination.
Yeah.
Thank you. The other thing that I wanted to touch on is not opposite of that, but as an add-on, take the agency to invent things in a scene. Don't break the game. Don't subvert the challenge that's been put out in front of you. If there's people on the rooftops and they're hard to get to, and that's been, very understood, don't just all of a sudden invent a ladder. That's a little shitty. Don't do that. But maybe your character sees something that he thinks he could make a ladder out of. And most GMs are going to say, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's get some rolls and see how that turns out. But yeah, so as long as you're not breaking the game or subverting the challenge, try to create things that your character can interact with in a scene. If your GM doesn't give you something that ignites that kind of spark in your mind, then come up with something on your own. It's okay.
Yeah, 100%. And the locations that you're putting your players in is essentially their play box, their tool box to make things work. They can only use what's around them, that not only encourages them to explore different options and alternatives and things like that, but you say, look, you're in this medieval inspired fantasy town, and that's what you can use. But if they start pulling out things that wouldn't be in that location at all, then I think that's where you got to draw the line. But I think most people understand, don't they? I think most people understand that there's there's an etiquette, isn't there? You don't if you see the thief, like you say, running across the roofs, and then you say, "Oh, there's a ladder," like you say, the player invents it. Then I think that is pushing it a little bit. But if they say, there's a, is there a makeshift way, encouraging, I suppose, questions to be asked of the landscape or the location to help them in executing what they have in mind, I suppose. Again, it's tips, isn't it? It's hints that you can feed to your players to sort of allow them to make the most of the environment they're in.
Absolutely. And be receptive of that as a GM. If your players are doing that kind of thing at the table, don't kibosh it over and over again. If it breaks something or pushes something, just say so. Say, no, I don't want to do that, and there's a reason.
Yeah.
Explain that to them. Say, I have a reason why that can't happen, but maybe we could, do something similar. But don't just shoot them down.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, we have another question from the audience. This one is from Dice Ogre. He asks, how does one unmundane the mundane whilst keeping it plausible? And how do you go about the opposite, making the impossible into the mundane?
That's a very good question. I'm just trying to think of the most mundane setting that I think I've ever used in a game, and it would probably be modern day London in Vampire the Masquerade London that I've got on my channel. And that's obviously a modern day game, but the player characters are vampires, and in that they explore modern day London with all of the modern day trappings of technology and everything that we're used to as human beings in the current day. Obviously, the world of darkness, which is the setting that the vampires exist in, is a slightly darker version of our world. But for the most part, it is as mundane. And I think it's once again, I mean, you can play on horror tropes with Vampire quite easily, because that's sort of the game it is. It is kind of about playing as the thing that goes bump in the night. So you, essentially, as characters, are the thing that makes the situation unmundane. You're the unnatural element that's walking in amidst normality. So sort of really hammering home that the location that you're now fighting this awful creature of the night is just an alleyway. And any alleyway, you and I could have seen it at one point in our lives. That's just what it is. It's completely normal, but it is being decorated by this really abnormal occurrence, or this abnormal moment that's occurring. So, I mean, that's just one example. I mean, that's kind of setting specific. I don't know. Have you got a suggestion whilst I think of the next part of the question?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, a lot of it is in the reaction of the people in the rest of the world around this element. If everybody else is reacting to it in a way that makes it seem like it's unnormal, then more than likely your players are going to match step. They're going to say, "Oh, wait a second, why is everybody freaking out that what we think is mundane is happening? This must not be normal." And vice versa. If a wizard comes flying down the street and nobody turns their head, your players are less likely to give it any attention. So I think a lot of it is you're able to set the expectation and tell your players kind of how they should be reacting by a lot of what you kind of envelop these elements in.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. How normal people are reacting to their normal day situation. You're absolutely right. If a wizard does fly down the street and no one reacts, then yeah, that kind of does set a precedent a little bit. I've just been trying to think about how about going about the opposite, making the impossible mundane. Yeah, I think that's a perfect example, to be honest. I can't think of a better one, to be honest. There's people just tolerating magic as if it was, completely normal. I think you're right. It is definitely in the perception of the people that are in the location that give that away, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a setting that I run games in called Caldera, and it's a fantasy western. Yeah. And in that setting, within the Caldera territory, where most of the games are meant to run, it's kind of the frontier territories. Magic is illegal unless you're licensed by the state back east. And magic items are being literally mined out of the ground in the Caldera, and legally they're supposed to be boxed up and shipped back east for cataloging and inspection and all that kind of stuff. Naturally, because it's a frontier place, that doesn't always happen. So when I'm running a Caldera game, one of the things that I'm constantly aware of is if players are casting magic in front of ordinary people or using magic items out in the open. And even if it's not a moment where they use the magic item and all of a sudden there's a sheriff who shows up and says, "You're under arrest," there's at least people going, "Oh my goodness," and they're freaking out and running away. They're vacating the streets because that's not normal in their setting. So looking for ways to illustrate it within the context of the narrative is almost always, to me, the best choice.
100%. I completely agree with you. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Let's go to another question from Lloyd. In many ways, some of the campaigns that I've run have been about a place as much as the characters. Mir was about the swamps and fens, at least as much as it was the characters. Old Ways, my Game of Thrones game, is about the stony shore and the house slate. Individuals come and go, but the place remains. Is this something that you consider in your games?
I mean, the idea of that game, like I've mentioned, I've already talked about it really, but yeah, the idea of that game is essentially the upkeep and the expansion of a house in Westeros, which absolutely confines us to that house, that location. Now, like I said, we go on adventures every now and then. For the most part, yeah, we are in that that locale. I'm just trying to think if I have a place that I think London, like I mentioned before in Vampire, is the most location based game that I think I've run, and that really comes with a benefit of me understanding London because I've lived there before, and yeah, that's interesting. The I'm just trying to think. I mean, I definitely have locations that have cropped up in games that players have experienced, but I don't think it ever extends beyond the characters, because I think the characters are the players, and if you don't, do you know what I mean? Like, everything is experienced through them. So, do you see what I mean? Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
It can't really, it can absolutely be about the place, and the place can have a character of its own, but yeah, I don't really see how it could it could be without them. Do you see what I mean?
Well, yeah, when you're talking about a location, especially something like a city with such a long history, like London, um, there's too much detail to be able to fully have that realized in the game. So what you're really doing is you're cherry picking from that location the things that are relevant to the story that you're telling, which ideally revolves around the PCs that are playing the game. So, if all of your characters are, from different factions, but they're all nobles, then you don't have to worry a lot about detailing the docks. You're not likely to spend a lot of time there. But if you're building into the campaign, one of these vampires is involved in shipping, and that's how they're getting in goods in and out of the country. Then you should detail the docks, or in this case, research the dock area of London. Learn, teach yourself.
Yeah,
but yeah, don't spin your wheels in places where it's not going to net you anything. That's
that's what
just
I
time
mean.
wasted.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was trying to say. Really, is that the point of that game is that we're developing that place. We are building it up. We are protecting it. We are expanding from it. So, I mean, it doesn't come as much as a surprise as that place has the character, because that's where we always are. I think in other games where you are traveling from one location to the other, it's interesting to see cultural changes and developments, and how their economy works differently or whatever. You notice certain things about different locations that you visit in an adventure game, but sometimes where people go are just there for the necessity of it, and you don't really need that much detail about the place sometimes. Like the game The Watch that I was talking about the other day, the characters, they pass through a ruined town. Now I know the name of that town, but it was never brought up. It wasn't important. I knew what it was called. It was written at the top of the description that I read out when they arrived, but it wasn't relevant to the situation. They were there for a specific purpose. They spent what time they needed there, and then they moved on. That was it. So until it absolutely is relevant in a game like Always, but I don't think it's as relevant in others, depending on the situation. Yeah.
I would have to agree. And a lot of times, too, you have to understand that more than likely, in the context of the game, the characters are getting and coming across much more information, and they're doing a lot more things than are necessarily represented in your game. Just like you're not describing when somebody gets up in the middle of the night to go to take a leak, unless something important happens in the story, the characters more than likely got the name of that place. They understood the name of that town. The players may not have, but the characters more than likely did. And later, even if a character is going to reference an NPC, this is one of the things that happens all the time. People, 3 or 4 sessions later, they're in the middle of this heavy role-playing scene, and they're talking about something that happened, and they mention, a previous NPC or location, but the player can't remember what the name was. And some people beat their players up for that kind of stuff. They're like, well, I'm not going to tell you if you didn't write it down or you don't remember it. It's like, well, the player doesn't remember because it's been 4 months since we've, done that. But in the game, it was yesterday, and the character would have remembered that. So just, say, you remember what the name was, no big deal. We'll just keep going. It's okay.
And I think that goes back into the question about how to make things seem mundane. Well, it's all very well saying that the gates of this town that they've just walked in is styled or constructed in a certain way to defend against a certain type of monster or something like that. That is an interesting detail that perhaps you could drop on your players. But some knowledge you just have to assume that they know, because these characters inhabit this world. And I understand what you mean about the players obviously not remember. Sometimes players don't remember the names of NPCs and things, and yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think it's just easier for the experience overall, rather than giving people a hard time. Let's just carry on, tell them the name, your characters would remember that. Let's go on with the stuff that we enjoy, rather than nitpicking over things that you would remember in the situation. If you're in that situation, you need to find this emissary or the kingdom will burn. Like, you'll remember that name if you're actually in that situation. But if you're playing Dungeons and Dragons and then you've got to work for a week and then come back the next week and you can't remember that guy's name, big deal. Sorry, triggered.
That's something that I feel hard. So yes, I appreciate you bringing it up. Yeah, it's... I'm a very laid back kind of DM in a lot of ways,
for sure.
Because ultimately that's what I'm here for. Is just to have fun and get crazy, roll some dice.
Yeah, if your players invest 10% of the amount of effort that you put into your world to create it, to put it in front of them, then you should consider yourself lucky. Because the thing I always remember is to think is when I talk about like my D&D settings to people, I have to remember no one cares more than you. Do you know what I mean?
It's
like,
so true.
With established settings, it's different. Like if you're playing, like we've been talking about a lot, Game of Thrones or Star Wars and things like that, that's slightly different, because you can talk about, oh yeah, we visited Ord Mantell, or oh yeah, we visited King's Landing, and people have a reference for that. Like, you'd understand people remembering those names because they're important places in very well-known storytelling franchises. But when it's your own setting, like, give people a break, you know?
Yeah, very much so. That's a hard lesson to learn as a world builder. Yeah, but it is an important lesson.
Very much so.
Awesome. Okay, we've got a question from Jeff Doty. While bringing pictures, the dotes, while bringing pictures to the table can help with it, at the end of the day, all we have to get across the look and the feel of a location are the words we can describe it with. With so much going into a location beyond just appearance, things like history, culture, and wildlife, how do you make sure your locations feel like actual living places and not just like a bland painted movie set for the players to talk or fight in?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to sound like a broken record. Like, it goes back to what I said at the beginning. Really, it's all about intention, isn't it? Like a city for me only sort of feels right if it kind of makes sense for it to be there. You look at it, or it's described to you, and it's just in the middle of nowhere, and there isn't a river running to it, and there doesn't seem to be any natural resources, and there aren't any farms. So you start asking these questions. Well, how do the people feed themselves? You know, how does trade reach this town? If it's built on the top of a mountain spire or something like that. Like you said before, like there comes a time where you can take a pinch of salt. Depending on your audience, it can be this hyper fantastical thing where you don't really worry about that, and it's totally fine. And it is really fun to play in those games. But yeah, I think there has to be a sense of intention there, and you don't even have to. Like, I can't remember the last time I ran a game. To counter my own point, really, I can't remember the last time I've run a game and explained this is the city of so and so. It lies on the river, blah blah blah, giving it this much trade, and it has this amount of agriculture. And I don't do that. But again, through the experiences that people have in your role-playing game surrounding that city, when they're approaching it, sure, they're walking through farmlands, they're seeing people working, the quests that they receive, and the intrigue that they stumble across should be informed by the people that exist in that place, because once again, they are there for a reason. They are there to fulfill a certain job, not only to be an element of a game, but also they're there to fulfill an element of that world, if that makes sense. So yeah, sorry, you're about to say something, go ahead.
No. I think for me, I think there's two kind of fail-safe ways to do that. And one is to to give the place a history. It doesn't have to be detailed. It doesn't have to be written out. But just like, again, to go back to Star Wars feels lived in because things are dirty, things are repaired, things are missing, things are broken. And that gives a sense of the world outside of what the players are seeing. Something happened to this thing before the players ever came across it. And that hints at there being a larger world at play. You don't have to detail that larger world. It's already been hinted at. And that's usually enough for your players to go, okay, like this thing has this particular symbol that's been spray painted on it. That gives me some information. Obviously, it's not very official if it was just spray painted haphazardly on the side of this thing. And what is that symbol? Who does that belong to? Why did they put it on this thing? And now all of a sudden, you have an enriched location without having to have done a lot of legwork to do so. I think hinting at there being a larger world, things going on outside of what the players are doing, is another fail-safe way of making a place feel like it's lived in, like it's a living, breathing world. That not everything is involved directly with the players and what they're doing alone.
I think Mos Eisley is a perfect example, really. It's the scumbag town, isn't it? And it tells you an awful lot of things just from face value. It's in the Outer Rim. It's on Tatooine. It's in the Wild West. It's away from the prying eyes of the Empire. And the reason it's away, again, there is intention here. The intention of it being there is so untoward, awful criminality can occur without any, any policing from the Empire. Not, you could argue they wouldn't police it anyway with the Empire, probably a bad example, but you understand what I mean. Like, it's there to be out of the way. It's there to be underhanded and criminal and unlawful. And you get that immediately from arriving at Mos Eisley in a game, I think. You know the kinds of people that are going to be there. You know that everyone is there doing a dodgy smuggling job or here to collect on a bounty or something, And again, like if you want to talk about how do you tell this to your players, well, like you instantly involve them. If it's a Jedi that's arrived in Mos Eisley shortly after Order 66, like there are ways that you can communicate that to your players without it's easily by people targeting Jedi, for instance. It's about the people that you run into and the conversations that you have. Like, I think description can only go so far in role-playing games. It's lovely and I'm one for having I enjoy giving nice descriptions and epic descriptions to things. I like to immerse people to play my games that way, but that will never be beaten by someone talking to the person who's actually comes from that place, who can tell them what's going on, who can, with their character, with their mood, can speak volumes to the place that they've arrived at.
I agree. I think it's a strong place to exercise the show not tell kind of mentality of storytelling. I think it's a lot more effective to show your players what a location is capable of, or the way that it is, just by letting them experience it, as opposed to just telling them and spoon feeding these details to them. Excellent. Okay. It looks like there's one more question from the audience, and then I have one more talking point that I would like to touch on, and then I think we're going to wrap things up. But
Perfect,
another question from Dice Ogre. What are some warm-ups or challenges one can do to better their location making?
Oh, warm-ups or challenges? To better their location making. I'm trying really hard not to say it depends, Jeremy.
I have something if you want just a moment.
Please go ahead first. Okay. Yeah, please go ahead.
So one of the ways that I typically approach doing descriptions, in particular about locations and things, is I pretend like I'm describing it to a blind person. or a deaf person if sound is important. Because to me, that's the mindset that helps me decide what are the important things to point out. How do I describe, how do I describe what a sunny day looks like to a blind person? What is it about that that's going to kind of put what it makes me feel when I see that in their mind? So that's usually what helps me kind of decide what to describe and how.
I think because the question is actually like, how do you practice getting better at making locations, really? And I think, I mean, I've been guilty of this before, like way back when I've just been running D&D and things, and people have come across certain locations, and I haven't really put much thought into it, to be honest. And it can show, it definitely can. I think. Well, more that like it could be very similar to the last town they arrived in, or the it's just a run of the mill. It's got somewhere for equipment. It's got a tavern. It's got a town square. Blah blah blah. Sometimes that can be useful. Sometimes if players, like we've mentioned, if they're just passing through, that's all it needs to be. I think maybe trying to move out of your comfort zone if you're very used to having societies that are all fairly similar. If they're all, I'm just trying to think of an example. If they're all Viking inspired, for example, then perhaps try running a game where your inspiration for their culture and their architecture and the people that work there is inspired by a different culture altogether. Ancient Greek culture, for example, like how does that differ? Like, is it cleaner? Is it nice to look at? Is it more beautiful? Is it nice to be here? Is it civilized? Is it unlawful? I think try and identify the things that you try and avoid whilst running games. If you genuinely want to try challenging yourself to do different locations, then I think that's a good way to do it, to sort of change the parameters of what you're working in.
So there's a thing that I use, and I call it steeping. There's a video about it on the channel here, and it's something that I very much am a proponent of. And it's whenever you're going to have a game that has a specific feel, a specific genre, a specific tone, a specific location, even, I will try to consume media that is related to that. So if I'm going to run a Gladiator game, I'm going to watch the movie Gladiator. I'm going to watch parts of Spartacus, the television series. Again, I'm going to be listening to soundtracks that have to do with those things. I am going to be, maybe there's an old Xbox game called Gladius that I absolutely love. Go back and play that. And what that helps to do for me is while I'm redoing and rewatching those things, I am soaking up any of the little details of how to describe something. In this one shot they showed for a long time, they kind of hovered on the way that the motes of light kind of danced in the streams of the sunlight that's coming through these heavy barred windows that are all rusted. That's a great image. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to put it in my mind, and in my game, I'm going to describe that scene that I saw in that movie to my players, maybe even verbatim. So it helps to sit down and watch those things or replay those things, reread those things, but have that in your mind. What about this am I going to be able to utilize? Mine it for ideas. I think that's a good warm-up or challenge to help make your locations better. Filmmaking is a great example because it's a visual storytelling medium, and a lot of what we're doing when we're talking is putting visuals in people's minds as a dungeon master. So if you can describe things in a cinematic way and establish a cinematic language with your players, that goes across really, really well. So pay attention in movies what the filmmakers are focusing on, and more importantly, try to figure out why they're focusing on those particular things. What are they trying to tell you by showing you these motes of light? And if you can figure out how to speak that way, that language, it'll immensely change your ability to describe things.
100%. And I think also don't be afraid to include other avenues that the players haven't explored before. For instance, if there's a particular kind of faction that you'd like them to encounter, or a different kind of challenge, you can introduce that with a cultural element of the game. Say they come across a tribe that live in this small village in the middle of the wilderness, and they have a particular culture of log throwing. They have contests to throw logs and things like that. Just things for players to get involved with, things for players to witness that they can see. And then they can decide, but perhaps they want to get involved with something like that. Perhaps that is just there to give this clue that these people have many different traditions and they are competitive as well. Like it's all different clues that you can drop in there just by adding things that potentially you haven't explored yet in your game, just on a fundamental level. Like you haven't had skill challenges where players can get involved with different NPCs just for recreational time and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it helps to make places memorable, especially if it's outside the norm of kind of what you've been doing in the game. Like you said, in one of the campaigns that I run online, the Momentum game, called Whispers and Fragments, they came to an elven city that was meant to be very much kind of like Las Vegas, only, in a fantasy setting. There's enchantment magic everywhere.
That's really cool.
You're walking down the street and all of a sudden an invisible or a barely visible set of footprints appears in front of you walking, and it turns into the front of a shop, and it's, there's illusionary people reaching out and trying to get your attention, hawking, their wares into the stores that they're inside of. And one of the things that happened was there was an illegal street race with these motorized carriages. And everybody in the area was angry at these very loud machines that were roaring through the street, literally carving, path in the street. And naturally the players are like, maybe there's something that we should go look into. And they did. So it's if you make the location work for your purposes, and then you allow the players to do something that is unique within that location, they're more likely to remember that location.
100%. They'll remember, this is the place where I entered that crazy race and I somehow managed to win. And then later on, that's something they can come back to. They now know that in their back pocket, they have a place where, say they have a dispute with someone and they say, well, the only way to decide this is to have a race. So they know that they can always go back to this place if they ever need to stage a competition with people, or they want to have a public meeting with a shady official that they're trying to get information from, but he demands that it takes place in a public setting. Then you think, we can meet him at the races. There'll be lots of crowds there. So yeah, I think that's a good idea. Installing an event or I guess it goes back to the gladiator thing, doesn't it? Installing something that people all know about, that you can get involved with, and then taking advantage of that and letting your players take advantage of that as well, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, I have one more point that I wanted to bring up.
I think there's one in the chat as well. I've just left.
Oh, there is. Sure enough.
Yeah.
Henry. Okay, well let's do his first.
Yeah, we'll do that.
How much research do you both do into your setting before you're comfortable with the results and want to unleash it on your players? Oh, he said, then he followed it up with sorry locations. So I think what he means is, how much research do you both do into your location before you're comfortable with the results and want to unleash it on your players?
I've actually taken to doing far more preparation before the campaign begins than session to session lately. I'm actually beginning to see more and more that I think I run better games when I've done a lot of work before I've even begun the first session. Because I like to do all the work at the beginning, and then it's sort of prep light for the rest of the game. That way I can just sort of be reactionary to what the players want to do, because I find That way, you're then following them with what they want to do, rather than trying to shape it into something that potentially I want the game to be, which isn't something I really have much interest in. So, yeah, with locations in particular, though, and I believe he said research. I think if it's like I'm running a Star Wars game, for example, and that has countless of planets in it, and I have, some might argue, done a crazy thing and said to the players, well, this is kind of a sandbox Star Wars game. You can, if you wanted to, you could go to basically any planet. Now, thankfully, I'm able to do that because a thing called Wikipedia exists, and I can, if they say they want to meet, not last session, but the session beforehand, they said, let's have this meeting in a public place. Like I mentioned before, we're going to have this meeting with the Chiss Ascendancy, but we want it on neutral ground, and we want it somewhere where we can hide, and potentially if we cause an uproar, then we could disappear into the crowd, or the Hutts will get angry at the dispute and come and stop it, or whatever. There is a more powerful force present here. And I thought, well, yeah, fair enough. You can absolutely do that. And I had the benefit, thankfully, of running a campaign that is an established setting. So the next session, I know I can just look into Nar Shaddaa, and just refresh my knowledge on it, and just give them the flavors of Nar Shaddaa and simply go from there. But with my own setting, I would say that, again, if only if it's relevant, that I do any full-on research into it. Strangely, with Watch, I actually did a little bit of looking into Greek philosophy, like you were saying before about the folklore being a way of teaching people that the wild is dangerous, that wolves might come and eat you. Well, the very idea of the game came from a quote that I kind of changed into, if within the walls of civilization is heaven, then beyond our walls lies hell. So it's very easy for me to just say that anywhere that's sort of sheltered and protected by great walls of civilization is fine. Everywhere else is a problem, and that is enough for that game. I don't really have to, like I said to you, I didn't even mention the name of that town before. I didn't really have to do any research in that. It just was there to serve a purpose. So it depends.
It really is the best answer, because it's the truth. It depends. And I think I would have a similar answer in that. I do tend to do a lot of research. A lot of that is a personal thirst for knowledge that I didn't have in high school, sadly. They taught history in a very boring way in public school. But since then, I have discovered that history is actually very fascinating. So a lot of times I will go to Wikipedia. Again, it's not the end all be all, infallible source of information. But going back in doing research, I have found more things that sparked my creative juices than any other thing that I've ever found before, even more than movies. History, mythology, folklore, they're all ripe with low-hanging fruit for fantasy and even sci-fi games. So I'm a big proponent of doing research, but I don't always do research for my locations. Sometimes there's a reason to, and sometimes there's not. Oftentimes it has to do with my level of comfort in establishing, describing, and existing in that location. If it's something that I don't feel like I'm very educated about, I don't understand what it looks like, I don't understand how big they build their towers, whatever, then I'm more likely to go and research that and inform that. So that way, when I'm describing that, I feel like I know what the hell I'm talking about.
Oh yeah, I think that's key. In terms of just making sure you're informed about things. Yeah, I'm completely on board with that, and I also do that. I guess in terms of researching for inspiration, I absolutely do preparation in that regard. There was a one shot I wanted to do I say a long time. Well, for about 6 months. I never got around to doing it, and it was based around a historical event that occurred in one of the Crusades, where a small force of armored knights in plate were on their way to Jerusalem on a crusade to take it over. And I mean, the idea of just a bunch of people traipsing around the desert in full armor is just an awful prospect to think of. But these guys did it, and essentially what happened was they got pinned upon this hill where there were their opposing force, the enemies that controlled the region at the time. I can't remember their name, but they basically had them pinned down with archery fire. And what they were doing was they were just raining arrows upon arrows upon arrows upon arrows upon this small group of knights who were completely armored and had shields. So they weren't getting hit, but neither could they move. They were just stuck there. They were pinned down. And it was basically an event that lasted, I think, about 2 days of these people just stood here trying to make sure they don't die from archery fire. And I thought that would make such a good one shot. And it's just like a little event that happened in history that sparked the inspiration of, oh, well, what if it was a fantasy realm where like a bunch of heavily armored adventurers have to defend a certain location from like a horde of goblins that are afraid to go close to them but are happy to shoot at them, you know? And there's sort of like a stalemate that happens, and how do you then shift the balance in your favor, that sort of thing, problem solving. So yeah, there's a lot of inspiration I take, I guess, from, I suppose, historical research. Yeah, history's great. It's just one thing after the other. Sorry, couldn't resist.
It's like it never stops. Excellent. Okay, we've got another question that came in. This one is from Gamers Theater. Do you have any suggestions on deflecting the notion that there must be loot in every room? Play with different people?
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, even if you play Baldur's Gate, there isn't loot in every room, you know? There's stuff in every room. Don't be afraid of having stuff in every room, but valuables in every room? No. I consider loot to be things like gold or weapons or potions, or like, if we're just talking about standard D&D, just stuff that's useful to you or stuff that you can sell, or just gold. That's what loot is to me. Don't put loot in every room, but definitely decorate every room. Definitely have like a room, again, have a purpose. Like, I keep coming back to it. I'm sorry, but it's true. Everything has to have some kind of logic, an internal logic. If it's like Star Wars, or if it has to be architecturally sound, as if you're playing in true medieval history or something like that. Like, but there has to be a reason for sure. And no, you don't need loot in every room.
No. I think if you're putting loot in every room, then all of the loot that your players are getting has been cheapened. And I think that's the case with any of these tips, tricks, tools, techniques, any of the things that a lot of people are, proponents of, and then try to get people to put more in their game. These are all a tool that you should keep in your utility belt. And you need to understand when the situation is right for you to pull out that particular tool and use it. You don't use a hammer to nail a screw into the wall. You don't. You need the right tool for the right job. And if you're building up your collection of tools as a dungeon master, as a storyteller, then you have a better capability of reaching for the right tool for the job for that moment. And then you use it, and then you leave it alone. And I think loot is the exact same thing. Like, if you're giving loot at every possible point where they could get it, then your characters aren't going to care. Your players aren't going to care. Whenever you drop that +1 sword, they're going to be like, that's fine. We've got 6 of them on the cart already. That's whatever. But if they find this sword and it's, the only +1 sword that they've found throughout the rest of the game, and it's, the only unrusted item in this entire room, that's different. It's unique. It subverts the expectation, and it's going to mean something.
And you might not necessarily be finding loot, but you can find clues. Like, you can find out more about the place you're in. Like, there could be things lying around. There could be, I don't know, a tapestry depicting a famous event that happened, like in the Great Hall, and it's depicted on the tapestry, things like that.
Absolutely. And like you said, every room should have a purpose. You don't just say, you walk into a 20-foot by 20-foot room. There's a door on the north, the east, the south, and the west. What do you want to do? Like, okay, what's going on in this room? Nothing. There's nothing in here.
It's
Nothing?
the room.
It's like just literally just a room.
It's a
like,
room to the next room.
Why did they bother to carve into the ground and expand it to this size and then do nothing with it? That makes no sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
But if orcs have taken over, the cellar and the dungeon of an old ruined castle, then more than likely there's going to be a room where they've been using the bathroom. So have your players come across that, because that illustrates a very clear point that these things have been here and have been nesting, and they don't care about normal etiquette and health and things like that. This you're describing something about this location by having them run across this crazy room. And while it's not loot, it's loot narratively speaking.
100%. Yep.
Cool. Okay. So now on to the last one that I have. Let's see.
The final question.
The one. Phone a friend. You and I played in the Jade Horde campaign together.
I was wondering when this is going to come up.
Where we had an excellent tension between our characters that built over a very short period of time, but became very intense. Yeah. One of the things that was kind of at the crux of, I think, the game overall, that campaign, but specifically of our rivalry, was how differently our two cultures interacted with the surrounding land of that game. So my question is, how could various cultures or factions having their own distinct plans for the same location make for great conflict for a party?
Yeah, I mean, the campaign that you mentioned, which I hope we'll return to at some point, I really do, because it was just so much fun. And I think, again, actually, if it's very much our characters represented the location, but from polar opposite sides, in the sense that, to explain, Jeremy's character was an orc native of the land, and my character was a colonial invader of the land. And it's the fact that these two are brought into a common cause of having to go off into the wilderness, and you be our guide, was so it tells you a lot about the setting of the fact that the characters came from two very different places. And that was very much the conflict of that whole game. It was humans versus orcs, essentially, wasn't it? And you were an orc, and I was a human. And because that dynamic was there, that conflict could be explored throughout every situation we came across. Like, there was a moment I remember very vividly, because I think it might be the first time I've ever done this in a game, was we were having a fight against some creature, I can't remember. I think it was a winged beast of some kind. We were in a ravine, and Jeremy, your character fell down the ravine, and my character took one look and went, just shrugged his shoulders. He didn't care. Well, the thing is, he started to learn to care, because he started to see that your character was an excellent warrior and had actually saved his ass in a few combats as well. So, like, you were beginning to see that he had like a begrudging respect for your character. But the conflict of that location was, I don't care if you live or die, and I imagine it would have been the same the other way around. Who knows? That was the whole setting, the whole location summed up between the relationship between two characters. It was mad. It was really good. So I went a bit of a rant there.
I missed that. No. I missed that campaign very much, and that relationship was one of the things that made that campaign so much fun. Was having those two characters that had adverse opinions about the way things needed to be done, what the proper thing to do in any given situation was. And the situations where our characters found themselves with their backs against the wall, and whether or not the other character was there to help. And I think, like, that campaign in particular has a very heavy Mesoamerican Spanish colonization kind of vibe to it. And I think that that's a really good example of how a location can drive a lot of your story. Because, again, in history, the search for El Dorado and things like El Dorado, the immense amount of gold that a lot of these Mesoamerican cultures had in abundance. And the Spanish came and saw there's nobody in their mind, nobody that's here to claim this stuff within miles and miles. It's all for us. And just started doing with it what they wanted. So it puts the resources of a location, and therefore the location itself, right in the middle, in the heart of the story of what's going on. And with that being the case, it ends up illustrating so much else about what happens in that game. It completely informed the relationship between you and I's character. It informed the kinds of missions that we were going on and the levels of danger that were involved in that mission. But it compelled your character to do it either out of want for renown or duty or what have you. It gives your your immediate motivation because it establishes a firm relationship between the location and your character.
Yeah, and the once again, it's kind of like the watch that I'm running at the moment. Again, the location was very much like it wasn't so much an enemy, but it was like the main issue was that we were on a journey. It was a journey game, and we had to survive the elements. And the fact that our location was often heavy jungle and inhospitable, regions of this Mesoamerican fantasy setting, like it it very much put in the fact that we were in the middle of nowhere. All we had was sort of loosely linked teamwork and minimal resources to survive on, and then complete this insurmountable task, which is still ongoing because we have to complete that one day. But yeah, no, it was just the fact that like you say, the location was put into the heart of the conflict. It was invasion. An invasion and colonial story, and the land was at the heart of it for sure.
Well, that's everything that I have, Rob. So thank you very, very much for agreeing to come on and be my guest and talk about location.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed myself. It's been really good fun.
Good. Like I said, I enjoy very thoroughly talking about gaming and finding kind of a narrow focus to put the attention for a little while, and trying to find somebody who matches up with kind of the idea that I have for a topic is always kind of something that I'm striving for in the game. And I'm very happy that you brought your I'm not going to say infinite, your vast knowledge.
You'd be lying if it was infinite. No, I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that. Sometimes I sort of talk in circles, but I don't want to keep coming back to the same points. But I think because that's the way that I run games. That's just the way that I'm sort of I reflexively run games now, and that's sort of the way that I lean to. So if I sound like a broken record, then well, change the record.
Not at all. I think finding your voice, your way of doing things and running things is a very important thing for a GM and a storyteller, a creative person in general. Finding your own path. The Hindu belief, there's many ways to the top of the mountain. You have to find your own. I think that's a very important lesson to apply to a lot of things in life, but also to storytelling. You need to find what works for you. Don't copy somebody just because you think that they're successful or you think that they're doing something the right way. Try what they're doing, but if it doesn't work for you, abandon it. Find your own way.
Definitely, 100%. Very wise.
Thank you, Rob. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find you on the internet?
Whatever
you want to plug.
Well, the games that I've been talking about tonight have been mainly The Watch, which is, like I said, it's humanity versus fantasy. Fantasy is evil. Nature is trying to kill humanity, and the lingering, flickering flame of humanity is guarded by the Watch, which are 4 individuals that are traveling into the wild using the journey's making travel matter rules, and it's been a real blast. And you can catch the third installment of that on Wednesday, which I'm really excited for. That's a really reactionary game. I love that because I just give them horrible things that are about to happen to them, and they just have to do their best to survive. It's really good fun. And then we also play Star Wars New Jedi Order, which is a game that uses Matt Click's Hyperspace D6 rules, and it is a saga that follows the 4 Jedi that Rey has trained about 8 years after Star Wars Episode 9. And it uses influence from both the Disney canon and the expanded universe, the EU, because there's so much cool stuff in there that like it's a crime to get rid of. So if you like the sound of that, go check that out as well. On Performance Check, I forgot to name the channel. Performance Check. Check it out. Check out Performance Check.
Absolutely. You should be able to find the performances on Performance Check and check them out
Check
at the
them
link
indeed.
at the link below in the video description. It should be down there. I'm fairly certain I covered that before we got started. If not, I will fix that. So yeah, Rob, again, thank you so much for coming on, man. It's been a blast to kind of pick your brain and get to talk to you a little bit outside the game.
It's just a real pleasure, man. I'll just with these closing thoughts. Like I remember the first, because I think we met at AtCon and we met a few times at AtCon, and the first time we met, it was, I don't know. It just seems like you're a brother from another mother, man. Like you're just a genuinely decent, creative, and inspiring person to be around. So thank you very much for inviting me. And you have to have me back again. We'll do this again sometime for sure.
Absolutely, man. I do appreciate the kind words very, very much. And I feel the same. Definitely a kindred spirit. And yeah, I haven't started going back through the roster of people that I've had as guests yet. There's still some people that I want to try to get on.
Sure.
And I have kind of a soft plan to start doing that, going back through people that have already been guests and having them come back on for a different topic. So that's definitely something that I would like to see in the future.
Spot on, man. Can't wait.
Excellent. I know it's very early there for you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Dude.
I appreciate it greatly. For anybody who has tuned in this evening and supplied us with questions, thank you very, very much. I sincerely appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. And I also appreciate if you are tuning in later and watching this after the fact. So thank you very, very much. If you like what you see, hit the like button, subscribe, all of that business. There's a lot of live plays and other videos of this nature on the channel, and there's certainly more to come. So until next time, may your dice roll high and your snacks always be within reach.